Hello, and welcome to That Recording Podcast, the podcast of conversations inspired by all things analog recording. I am your host, Joe Montague, also known as, are you that Beatles drums guy off Instagram? All you need is drums. Yes, that is me. And each episode, I'll speak with a different guest from all avenues of the recording world. You can expect discussions on everything from the mentality and philosophy of recording right down to the nerdy gear talk and everything in between. With guests ranging from industry legends to current music producers, engineers, musicians, and gear manufacturers. If you're like me and share my enthusiasm for hearing their stories and learning from their experiences, then this is the podcast for you. Don't forget to hit subscribe on your podcast player so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy this, please leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening. Obviously, 5 stars, please. And it really helps to grow the love for analog recording and helps me attract a variety of different guests. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show! Hello, and welcome to this first episode back after what feels like, and actually is, a fairly lengthy hiatus. This episode's going to be a bit of a different episode to normal. It kind of harks back to that very first episode that I did right at the beginning of the podcast where I kind of told you a little bit about me. But this one I'll be explaining basically where I've been for the last year, what I've been doing, why I kind of abruptly paused it halfway through an episode, which I kind of feel guilty about, but that is what happened, I'm sorry. And also, there has been a name change, which you'll have noticed, why that's come about, and what to expect of this new series. This is fairly weird talking like this. I'm finding it quite uncomfortable. I'm sure I'll get used to it. Feels weird recording podcasts after such a long time away. So then, so I'm going to leave it all in, warts and all, even when I'm umming and ahhing. So there we go. And that kind of explains what this episode is going to be about. And I have to say, before we start, big thank you to everybody that reached out over the last year. That's such a corporate saying, isn't it? Thanks to everybody that reached out. I had quite a lot of emails basically asking me where the podcast has gone, where my isolated drum stems have gone, what I've been doing, and all this kind of stuff. And some people actually just genuinely worried about me and if I'm okay, which is really lovely. I mean, it's quite... When you do remote recording sessions and that kind of stuff, you're basically working on your own all the time, even though you're talking to other artists around the world and, have a lot of phone calls and stuff, but you are essentially working on your own. So it's quite a nice feeling to know that there's a big community of us out there across the world. That's really cool. So I really do appreciate it. Thanks very much. So first of all, I suppose I should address why I stopped halfway through an episode. I mean, basically, I think I ran the podcast, the first set of series. I nearly did 100 episodes, and it was every single week, and it just got a bit too much. Basically, the whole idea of the initial bit of the podcast was as an excuse to chat to cool people, purely for selfish reasons. I want to chat to these cool people, and I didn't really know how many listeners I'd get. And it kind of went much, much bigger than I ever thought it would. And then I felt this pressure to keep doing it every single week. And I've got quite high standards for myself, and I wanted to keep a super high standard of guests. And then obviously inadvertently from doing the podcast and doing the drum stems, I got quite a lot of work. People wanted me to play drums on their tracks, which I was extremely grateful for. And I got quite busy with that. And, as some of you who have worked with me know, I've got 2 kids and all this sort of stuff and run this studio. So just got too busy, basically, and it all kind of came to a head in August. Nothing major happened. I didn't have a breakdown or anything like that. Just kind of thought, I just don't have the time. I'm not managing my time effectively at all here. And I decided to take a break for a few weeks. I thought it'd be 4 or 5 weeks, and it ended up being just over a year. Because then again, once you've stopped, it's hard to get the momentum to start again. I thought I want it to, if I do start again, I don't want to just start and get back into find myself in the same situation again. So decided to try and make it all a little bit more manageable, which is essentially what this is now. So then over the last year, really, I've had another baby. Me and my wife had another baby, so we've got 3 children now, which seems crazy. And 3 children, let me tell you, is a lot more than 2 children. I've had a huge amount of work in at the studio, people asking me to do drum sessions on stuff, which I absolutely love. And I reignited my old Instagram, which was at Joe Montague Drums. I have to say, this feels really weird talking about me like this. I don't really like it, but it's interesting. Hopefully it's interesting for you. So yeah, at All You Need Is Drum, at Joe Montague Drums, and tried to kind of get my drum session stuff going separately from the All You Need Is Drums thing, because it was getting a little bit confusing for people I was working with and for me, really. And I'm separating All You Need Is Drums as a very sort of Ringo, Beatles, 60s focused thing. And then, again, if anybody's worked with me, that's like a really strong facet of my personality, but there's quite a lot of other stuff that I do and things that I want to get involved with, and it didn't really fit under the umbrella of All You Need Is Drums. So I wanted to kind of separate that out a little bit, which is what I've done. And yeah, it's been great. Been doing loads of work, loads of drum sessions, quite a lot of mixing and producing actually over the last year, which has been really cool. Quite a lot of people, working with quite a lot of people that I spoke to on the podcast, which has been like one of the best things, is just connecting with these people all over the world and then actually working with them, which has been really great. So I've enjoyed doing a lot of that. And I finally got myself in a position this summer where I've recorded quite a lot of new podcast episodes, and I felt the time was right to just launch back into doing all of this again and sort of managing my time a little bit more effectively. And my wife has jumped on board as a kind of helper with all of this stuff so that I can concentrate on doing the creative side of things. You know, anybody who is involved with music will know it's doing the social media stuff and, you know, all of the sort of practical things around this stuff. It's really quite hard, to be honest. My brain doesn't really work that way. I just want to go to the studio and procrastinate and create, just do fun stuff. And then when it comes to posting on socials, it may appear that I'm quite good at it. I get told I seem to be quite good at it quite often, but it's the part that I could do without, to be honest. You know, I just want to make stuff, and having to document everything you make, that's not what any of us signed up for. We just want to make. So yeah, gratefully I've got my wife involved, who's helping me take care of some of those things, just the sort of practical legwork of doing that kind of stuff, because she's brilliant at it. And I'm really, really happy that she is up for getting involved. So that's kind of helping the time management side of things. So yeah, that's that. In terms of the name change, I should get on with the name change. So I kind of was asking a lot of people to come on the podcast, and they were almost saying, why it's 60s? Like, I'm not really a 60s recording guy. And I kind of was mulling that over, and I've realised that over the course of all the episodes, I mean, that's been fairly obvious to anybody that's been listening, that it's not always 60s. It's kind of, what we talk about is a mentality of approach. A lot of times, the approach of recording is a very 60s and early 70s. It's that golden era. You know, what the tagline of the old set was, the conversations in the golden era of recording. Kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Concentrated all of that sort of 60s music stuff into one bit. And I would say it's an analog approach, even though we're all using tools like Logic. I'm recording this on Logic, and we've all got DAWs that we use. It concentrates into this one thing, which is essentially just an idea, a mentality of approaching how we create music. And we've got tools available to us, and you know, at our disposal that we can use. But as long as we keep that core idea of how we're making and why we're making, then the results are going to be positive. So in terms of changing the name of the podcast, I wanted, that recording podcast was quite simple, and it keeps the kind of identity similar to what was there before. And I had my friend Adam Mallet, who's designed everything that you can see of me online, all his design. He's incredible. So he's done a whole new fresh design for the podcast, which the idea was it kind of harks back to that 70s kind of thing, and it's red, so it's got a bit of a recording light feel. And I think he's done an incredible job. So the whole idea now is that I can talk to different people and from different walks of the music industry, but the baseline of the conversation will always be, we're approaching a sort of an analog mentality despite using digital tools. So yeah, that's the kind of the whole idea. And I suppose if I'm kind of wanting to elaborate on that ever so slightly. So it's the idea that when I record drum sessions, I tend to record, I mean, rightly or wrongly, I treat Logic almost as a tape machine. So I'll work up what I'm going to do on the track, and I'll have an idea of what I'm going to do, and then I'll pretty much always just try and grab a full take if I can. And sometimes that's not possible and have to do drop-ins, but most of the time I'm hopeful that I can get from the beginning and the end to the end of a track once I kind of decided the sort of skeleton structure of what I'm going to play, and then I can dip into other fills or whatever. I can broaden, I can sort of stretch out within the confines of what I've created. So if I'll create a skeleton drum track, I'm going to say, right, on this section I'm going to go to these particular bits, it might be ride cymbal and snare drum, whatever, but the fills, and maybe I don't plan all of them out and I can kind of improvise within a certain structure, you know what I mean? And if I can record from start to finish in Logic rather than dropping in for all these different sections, then there might be other little things in there that I'm not particularly happy with, but the whole vibe of a take is going to be correct. It's going to be there. I have to have exceptions in, maybe I don't like that fill, but maybe I like the fill later on. And I'm quite disciplined in thinking, well, that's all right. And I'm going to send that to, the artist that I'm working with, and not be overly pernickety, what a great word, or precious about those little details, because that to me just adds up to the vibe of what it is. And the temptation there is to feel quite almost like you're not trying hard enough because you're not being pernickety. You feel like if you're not making 120,000% effort into getting every single detail correct, then you're not trying hard enough, or you're not doing a good enough service. And that's, to my mind, that's the wrong way of thinking about these things. If you need to let the music breathe and let a few little mistakes and things happen for the greater benefit. And the more you kind of pick away at the details, sometimes that's for the better. That is absolutely the case. I'm not saying we shouldn't be detail focused, but sometimes and often in my opinion, it can be to the detriment of it. The more you pick around, the more the thread begins to unravel, and you end up with a stale kind of Frankenstein of a track. And I've been there plenty of times, and I don't want to. That's not what I want to send to a client. I want to send a coherent, I called it client. I hate the word client. That's not what I want to send to an artist. I want a clear, holistic sort of all-in-one track that sounds great, albeit that maybe there's one or two things that I probably wouldn't let slip through because it's my ego, and I kind of think, well, whatever. But then I can send that through and know that that's a coherent sound, and it's honest, and it's right from start to finish. And they're probably not going to focus too much on those sort of minuscule little fills that I kind of, my pride wants to take care of, because maybe I feel like I could do something better or more interesting. But they're not going to notice those things, and I think that's for the betterment of the whole track as a whole. The track as a whole, basically. That's kind of what I mean by an analog approach to recording, and that's been the same approach that, this last year I mentioned I've been getting involved in a lot of mixing and producing, which has just been an offshoot of A, the podcast, and B, doing drum sessions. My studio's amassed quite a lot of gear, which drummers tend to do. And it was just I think maybe the way I think about music has meant that people have been getting in touch, asking me to get involved a little bit more musically, which has been a real privilege, and I really enjoy doing. So my approach to that kind of stuff is exactly the same, and I think that's quite uncomfortable for some people. I'm quite casual about it. I'll push people to perform in a particular way. We have an idea of here's the sort of texture and the timbre, or this is a little abstract, but the emotive space that we are working in. So here's the emotion that we're trying to create for this section of a song, and here's the sort of language that you can use on the instrument. That's a discussion that takes place, and then it's kind of just go for it. And as long as the feeling is right with what you're playing, and you're in that kind of space, and you stay within that space, then it almost doesn't matter what you play if the intent is there. It's nearly always going to sound right, and some choices will be better than others, if you do numerous takes. But yeah, and it's that, and I think that is quite uncomfortable to some people, but I think that can get really beautiful results, and give you something that you potentially A, didn't know that you could do, and B, that is slightly different to what you were expecting. And it's again exactly the same way in mixing. And I suppose mixing is, I mean, this links to the sort of drum mentality as well. I'm not banging plugins all over everything. Again, not that I have any issue with any of that, as you'll hear in some of the discussions that we've got coming up. But I'm kind of I mix in a way that's quite, I can see what's going on. I don't like this sort of hidden stuff and like clevery things that are going on in the background. I'm not really into that. I kind of into, let's tidy up the audio so that it sounds really neat and tidy. Let's balance it. And then if something's not sounding right or needs, a little bit of compression to even it out, or whatever a bit of EQ to make something stand out in a particular place, or whatever it is, then I'll do that. I suppose in the modern age of social media and YouTube and things, that can be quite a, you'll hear in some of the episodes that I discuss, I'm essentially a self-taught recording guy. I never went to uni to learn about recording. I went and learned drums. So then I've had to rely on my instincts and just, YouTube knowledge to get, YouTube didn't exist at the beginning, but other knowledge to get along with this stuff. And I think that can be quite an anxiety-inducing thing. You kind of think, well, other mix engineers must be using all of these these amazing plugins that everyone talks about on Instagram or whatever, and I realize that I'm a contributor to Instagram stuff, but hopefully the stuff I put out there is an honest representation of what I do. I'm not trying to be anything else. And with that in mind, that you sort of I'm trying to escape all of that stuff. So I'm thinking, actually a lot of the top end mixers that I know and top end producers that I know are not using those tools. They're just using very simple, well, if the audio sounds good, then that's cool, just like it is. And they're using very small EQ adjustments. They're using compression in a very small way, if at all sometimes, or they're using it in a stylistic way, not necessarily in a fixing way. And that's been my approach to mixing as well, is trying to keep everything as unfiddled with as possible, because it's a rabbit hole. The more you fiddle with it, I'm going to quickly move off this analogy. The more you kind of tinker with what's going on, often the worse it gets. And it's exactly the same that I just said with the drum stuff. So trying to keep everything really nice and simple, balancing it well, and then you've got a fair, it just sounds like it should sound. It sounds honest, and I really, really like that. And then if you're going to do some flavor stuff that, in the box, treating it again with a bit of an analog way. So put one reverb on and let that stand out as the feature of that particular thing, or put a compressor on and drive it hard if that's the sound that you want that particular element of the track to have. And don't have all of these things that are at sort of Disney levels of caricature coming through and competing with each other. So that's been my approach to mixing as well. And yeah, so with that in mind, that was kind of the viewpoint that I wanted to take this whole next season to, and the discussions that surround that recording podcast, as it's now going to be known. So trying to talk about, to escape from this idea of we have to layer up loads of plugins and use all these fancy tools to make things sound good, which just frankly, in my opinion, isn't the case. They all have a place, don't get me wrong. I'm trying to have a really balanced viewpoint here, but for me and to my ears, stuff sounds better when it's done simply and with... There's one overriding picture in my mind, and this is a bit of a cliched thing, but it's Picasso when he draws I think he draws a picture of a cow, and it's like a meme that's been going around on Facebook, I think, and it's like four pictures, and it starts off very complicated and then gets simpler and simpler and simpler, and we're all aiming to get that handful of broad brushstrokes that give the person who's listening, or in this metaphor, the person that's looking, it's very clearly a picture of a cow, even though it's a handful of brushstrokes and that's it. And that's musically what I love, is if you can conjure up an emotive image in someone's head using a very small number of brushstrokes. It's finding that quintessential essence of what it is that you're looking for. And that sounds very pretentious, but it's distilling it down into what actually is needed here. And, there's drummers, I hope that's what I strive for in my drumming. But there's drummers like Steve Jordan. Steve Jordan, if you don't know of him, go and check him out. He's been playing with the Rolling Stones. But he's the guy that epitomizes this, in my opinion. You watch him playing, he's a monster player. In the 80s, he was all over the place. He was like fusion chops and could do all manner of crazy things. And you watch him play now, and he's so simple, yet he's used by some of the biggest bands on the planet purely because he's turned into that Picasso. He knows how to emote exactly what needs emoting in that moment by playing that really simple thing that's just like, yeah, it's that. All you need to say, all you need to lead into that section, or all you need to do to communicate the emotion of this section is just do that one thing, and we all understand. And that's kind of what I'm striving for in everything that I do. He's saying after waffling through all of this stuff, maybe I should try and get this with language. I've been reading quite a lot of poetry over the last year, which I've loved. And this is a bit of a clang, but I've been doing a few bits of work with the UK Poet Laureate Simon Armitage, and he's so inspiring. And I love this idea of using minimal words to communicate maximum things. But that's not a skill I've learned, sadly. And hopefully you'll all be laughing along to this because anyone that knows me well knows that I'm a big talker. I love it. Right, anyway, I'm going to move on. So in terms of the guests coming up, I've got a real lovely mix of people. I'm just going to try and pull it up on my phone so I can see the list in its entirety. Podcast, there we go. I'm going to talk about a few different guests that are coming up. So we're going to structure it in a sort of series so that I don't get burned out again. And I've recorded nearly all the episodes for this series already. And we've got quite a lot of guests. So I think we're going to do about 10 episodes. And then we're going to take a little short break, maybe for a couple of months, and then do 10 more. That's kind of the aim, and we'll see how it goes. So obviously I'm going to start with the second episode of Paul Butler, who was the engineer that worked with, and producer that worked with Michael Kiwanuka, Devendra Banhart. He's ridiculous. He's the perfect embodiment of mentality over equipment. So, he's got such a rich history of analog stuff. Analog experience, but then what he was explaining in some of these episodes is that actually the sounds he gets use a lot of plugins, and that's totally cool. It's just more of a mentality of approach than the gear that you use. And if you're using plugins and you use them effectively, then go for it, as long as you're keeping the approach the same. So we're going to start with the second episode of that. If you haven't gone back and listened to the first episode, I would advise that you go and do that. Paul Butler's incredible. I was so excited when I finally managed to get hold of him. He's been almost top of the list since the whole podcast started. So I was so pleased when I spoke to him. Also speaking to quite a lot of other people. There's a company called Wondertone, who's going to be coming up after Paul Butler, using, again, that hybrid of analog and digital stuff to create what feels like analog sounds. Really incredible stuff. Roy Saint, who is he's the drummer. He is the drummer who played on with Ron Ryan, who was a feature of a previous episode, who I made a record for and with of his songs. And I'm in touch with his son Alan, and Alan, I asked Alan if I could speak to Roy for the podcast because he has some really cool recording experiences from the early 60s, and he went off to have another career, but I was really keen to pick his brains about what happened, how that all works, recording on Denmark Street and getting acetates and all that kind of exciting stuff. It's an exciting scene. Andy Kahn, who is a keys player, who plays in the Turtles. JB Pilon, who is a producer from London. Well, he's from France actually, but he was based in London, Buffalo Recording Studios. Since relocated up north, right next to me, which is really cool. There's an engineer who I met earlier this year called Chris Wilkinson, who was previously in Nashville, but he's from Sheffield, and he's worked with Taylor Swift. That's pretty cool. And now he's relocated back to Sheffield, and of course I had to speak to him. He's so experienced, and he's got such an incredible insight into recording. I'm going to speak to my friend Ben again from Rare Tone Mastering, who, since I spoke to him on the first episode, which was quite a few years ago now, he's started cutting music straight to vinyl, which is very, very cool. And he's obviously he's a mastering engineer, so this was a natural extension from what he's done. And there's a few other episodes that I'm just yet to pin down, so they're all, some of them are booked in the diary, but I don't want to tell you about them quite yet, just in case they don't happen. But that's very exciting. There's quite a lot coming. So with that in mind, thank you for listening to me waffling, and I hope that the new series is welcomed and that you enjoy it. I've worked quite hard to sort of tighten everything up and make it a bit more professional. So yeah, hopefully you enjoy all of this stuff. And there is now an outro, but I'm going to feel compelled to say it. But I always love to hear from you guys, and it's joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. But yeah, you'll hear all of that in the outro that is now been professionalized, so it's coming right now. But yes, anyway, thank you for listening, and I will see you guys next week. Goodbye. Thank you so much for listening to That Recording Podcast today. I'll be back next week with more conversation all about analog recording. And for now, don't forget to hit subscribe, and please do share the podcast with friends or anyone else you think is as nerdy about recording as we are. If you'd like to follow me on socials, you can find the podcast on Insta @That Recording Podcast. For my adventures in Ringo nerdery and all things Beatles drums, it's @AllYouNeedIsDrums. And if you're just curious about my work and recording and maybe the odd picture of me having a beer or hanging out with my wife and kids, it's @JoeMontagueDrums. And in other exciting news, I have a TikTok. I don't really know what TikTok does or is, but my wife says I need to have it and it's cool, and I should tell you about it. So there we are, follow me on TikTok. Don't be a stranger, and see you next week. Goodbye!